I was just letting you move forward.
All right. Everything's all right? Any questions? Comments? We have colored chalk, we have eraser, or we're on time.
Could you do me a favor before we begin?
Sure.
Could you tell me what's happening with this now while they're going with
That's a good question.
Yes.
Good question.
Please, if we're taping.
And
All right. And mercy. All right. Thank you. Yeah, we're having a lot of problems, but there's no problems that things that he and I spoke about, and Elizabeth, that I thought were key. And this is what we're going to talk about today, because we're going to talk about us and how we as an African people, without any support or encouragement, a little encouragement, but not enough to affect the royalty, how we destroyed Egypt. It wasn't the European. It was us. It was our greed. It was our abuse of spirituality that ruined the Kemetic Empire. Fortunately, our Nubian brothers and sisters and our Ethiopian brothers and sisters were far more advanced spiritually than the Kemites. Now, please know what I'm saying. I'm talking about, it's like I'm comparing New York Africans to, I'm comparing, let's say, Bronx Africans to Queens Africa. That let's use Queens as Kemet, let's use Queens as Ethiopia and Nubia. That the Africans here were more aware of the deepness of the spirituality, but because the Manhattan or the Bronx Africans lived near the Yonkers Europeans, they had a whole different life system that they had to. The Kemites were fighting everybody. In Nubia, they weren't fighting anybody because there was nobody more powerful to come into Nubia. And it's important to know that every time the Kemetic system was falling, the royalty, the nobility of Kemite, the Maatian ones, would return to Nubia and would gather strength and with a new force come forward. Remember what we spoke about civilization, about how no new civilization comes up of its own. Parthenogenesis was used, parthenogenesis, which means to have reproduction without the sexual activity. The same is true for the ancient civilizations. You cannot have a new civilization without a mixing of certain bloods. And what happened each time that you're looking at the Kemetic civilization, you'll watch it die out. At the end of the 6th dynasty, you'll see it dying out. And you'll see Asians come in and overpower, and fighting starts. And then you'll see a movement of Nubians coming north again and taking over, like Mentuhotep of the middle, who brought the Middle Kingdom into place. The Intef 1, 2, and 3, who came back and had more power. What you'll be looking at is us making errors. And it's important because this is where I many times get slack. Because we as a people get very involved in the beauty and the wonder of Africa. And we don't want to look at where we made our mistakes. And if we do not look at our mistakes, then we're bound to repeat them. And as much as I care for Africa, and as proud as I am, I want to examine her errors so that they don't happen again. And when we go through this lesson plan, you're going to see that the same thing that was happening in the 6th dynasty, the same thing that was happening at the end of the 10th dynasty, which was brought in the second intermediate period, is happening amongst us today. The only difference between yesterday and today is that today we are totally out of control of being in control. Back in Kemet, we had a choice. And we were the ones that drove ourselves to that point. Here, we have a whole system that assists us in driving us to that point. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is the 18th and 25th dynasty, but you cannot talk about the 18th and 25th dynasty without going back to the 5th dynasty. You can't understand how the 18th dynasty came into existence without going back to the end of the pyramid dynasties and looking at the destruction of the African civilization in Kemet, not in Nubia, and not in Ethiopia. You're dealing with a specific location right in here, particularly Lower Kemet. But we're not talking about down here. This is strong, and this is growing, and this is getting better than it was yesterday. But here is going down, and it's going down because they raised themselves to such a level of richness and beauty that they began to abuse it. And the same thing is happening in the European society of today. This is how I know it's falling. And I don't need anybody to tell me. Neither do you. All you have to do is look, and this is the method to go by. Is your life happier today than it was yesterday? And I'm talking about the things that you pay for, the level of the atmosphere, the view, the ambiance of the society. Are people trusting one another? Is there something building? Do you notice that more and more stores are putting up those plexiglass or whatever it is? Gates. Is that happening less? Are people taking gates down, or are more people putting gates up? When you're looking at that, you're looking at the classes who have been oppressed rising. And when you see the classes rising, the first thing you want to look at is what is the society doing to correct that? All you have to do is look at Governor Cuomo and his plan for education. If you're ever looking at something in a society, look at what they hit when times get bad. Do they hit education for children? Do they hit senior citizens? Do they hit your medical rights? Do they hit the arts? The arts are key, you know. A society that has time to deal with the arts is a civilized society. A society that must take its art money and put it into the military complex or into their own self-centered plans, you can see what's happening to the society. If you lose your art is not entertainment. Dance and song is not entertainment. It never was amongst Africans. It was as viable a way of communicating as Imhotep was writing a medical book.
Well, it's funny you said that, because something just happened Saturday in afternoon. Just happened where we live at. There's only one check cashing place. And the radius.
Are there more check cashing places in the community now?
No, see, that's what I'm saying, see? See, in a 25 block or 35 block radius, one check cashing place. What they did was this, now this check cashing place was owned by a brother. Without letting nobody know anything, he sold out to a European, right? This European didn't want to cash nobody's checks because he did not know them personally, and told people they have to wait until Tuesday. See, kind of little error in the station. But we found out that they're doing this, that other check out, like they did it with the banks and whatnot, to control the people. Now, nobody's opening up any new stores or food supplies and stuff like this here. They're making the people become dependent in their lifestyle. When the people have nothing to say about it. He said, well, I don't know, you're waiting for so-and-so because I don't know you. Whether you have proper ID or not. I mean, this is to promote confusion. Like when a mother wants to feed the kids and whatnot, you can't cash this supposed to be an exchangeable piece of paper for food stuff. And your baby is still hungry and whatnot, and you know you got to wait a period of 3 days. This is another way of like apartheid or what's happening in the Gulf situation. See, this is what I'm saying. When it was up at the map, there's a note that is coming up in my mind about reviewing all this history. And I find out the archaeologists nor historians are saying anything about it. They're not talking about dietary law. That's one thing about what our ancestors were practicing in those times. Or they're not talking about the hygienical practices. And those practices, what we need to do today, and I think that's why I just mentioned this, if we can't eat right, buy soap and stuff like this here to prepare our being, our body being, right? Because we be within the body. If we can't eat the proper things, or we might find out about fasting, but that doesn't, help cleanse the body, which is another part of hygiene. All around the world, our brothers and sisters are getting sick because of toxic immune deficiency. And I'm not basically talking about AIDS. See what I'm saying? I'm talking about because we're getting bad food or either no food at all and all this stuff like that, or not proper water, Because if we don't have to talk about the air, but not even proper water or proper sanitation. And our people are lost to this. Say, oh, we under this or something. Well, we do with what we got in there, and that's the best thing going. Yeah, that was good at that time to get us to here now, but if we keep doing that, we won't have no here now for the time to come. See, until we get an idea of our cleansing, our proper hygienic laws, and dietary. Because that's the only thing that we can do to overcome the system. And I think that's where the basic fundamental of education is at. Not about how many rubbers that you got to give to a guy for free for nothing to cover the basic pineal gland in his pants. Or this diaphragm or whatever for the system. Yeah, so we're going to encourage more parties and dance. You know, look for the video. See, we know these are great deceptions of delusion. But the basic things is to maintain the harmonious function of life. It's got to be between the dietary law, the cleansing, and the hygienical practices, which are not taught. I mean, we weren't even allowed. If we didn't eat the wrong food at the time, it bust our teeth out and smashed our head. So we was grateful to get the guts. But now guts are soul food or whatever, yet they got their brains all tied up. See, that's what I'm saying. To be able to decode this level of value of understanding of importance. That's what I'm saying. It's a key issue. So I'm saying I never hear any of the historians or archaeologists or all of them talk about, they may talk about that, but they may talk about how the body was prepared. They never talk about what gave us the ability to open up our minds to accentuate the other 90% of our brain power. We have run around less than 2, more or less than 10 that he's operating on. We're working on less than 2. Actually, but we're doing great with the 2, that I admit. But I'm saying, if we could only be able to accentuate and awaken and activate that, their system doesn't matter. See, that's what I'm saying. It's some little unique little thing in an experiment. You know, like maybe light can shoot to everybody's brains at the same time, go through the ears and wake up. You understand what I'm saying? God, that's a long time.
I know I haven't been here for a while, but I don't want to sound rude or anything like that. But I just want
No, I'm sorry, Sister. Can you speak?
Oh, you can't hear me? I mean, I know I haven't been here for a week, but I don't want to sound rude or anything. But I see right now you have some very important information to give us concerning our plight in America. And I do wish if the brother could just hold his comment to later, if he doesn't mind, so that we could get through the drug lesson. I don't know about how anybody else feels, but I know this is how I feel, and I'd like to know what you have to say.
Okay, well, we're going to start right now. We're going to start with 18th and 25th Dynasty. We're going to work on some things. I'm also going to remind you of some things that happened before, because it's a very important book, The Temple and Man, that we're going to talk about again. It's a very important book that comes back in this lesson plan, and it's important that you know this. Okay, let's start. Like I said before, we can't even talk about the 18th Dynasty without going back in time to the 5th Dynasty to see where the planting first started and the problems first started arising. The problems began, remember we talked about the Pyramid Age. The problems really began around the 5th Dynasty. The pharaohs lived very long times, and by this time the pharaonic system had changed a bit. At one time in the beginning, like Menes was looked upon as a god, as a representative of God, but not really a representative of God from the African perspective. What he was a representation of a God on earth that all humans should aspire to. The personality of the Pharaoh mandated that he be the cleanest, the most intelligent, and the most pious of people, and the most honest. In other words, what I'm saying is that he was an example. She was an example of what a perfect human being should be. Did not lie, did not cheat, and if he did, this Pharaoh could be removed immediately.
Isn't that totally different than what they give us in the movie?
Yes.
It's unbelievable.
Yes, because what they try to give you is a whole nother Western perspective of what Pharaoh is. Pharaoh was a person that was supposed to emulate what a god was supposed to be. And through his lifelong training, you see, pharaohs weren't at one time actors. They weren't at one time directors of certain programs. They were the children of the king and queen who were being groomed to take over positions of power. They were taught to be pharaoh. Do you know what I'm saying? How heavy that is? When someone assumes the position of pharaoh, that person who assumed position had been trained from the moment that he or she was born to assume that position. They didn't go from a book publisher into being leader of the country. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But it's just that if you're a book publisher, your best thing is dealing with papyri and information. Therefore, you got into that area. A pharaoh was groomed and was the most pious of human beings. And if this pharaoh did not represent, and you see another problem, and the reason why I gave you the royal Kemetic wives is because I want you to see the place of the women. Because unfortunately, much of what happens in African society is not spelled out the way it should be in terms of the role of the woman. The society would stop without the woman. The pharaoh couldn't do his job without the woman. Imhotep couldn't build anything without the woman. There was a key role that the woman played in the society that was known, accepted, and it was fluid. Because most times you will see in a lot of the reliefs, you will see the woman with her arm around the husband. There's a place in Abu Simbel where you see a smaller woman. In terms of how big Ramses was, you see the smaller woman holding up his legs like this. And when the Western society looks at this, you see the woman was small and the man was big, so the man was more important. It had nothing to do with that. In fact, it was the woman who, like roots of a plant, hold up the very essence of the plant. The woman's arm around the man gave him that counterpart support that allowed him to be the pharaoh that he was. Without that support, he would not be who he was. Because it is not written in, people misguide and misunderstand what they're looking at. No society could have allowed Hatshepsut to exist if there wasn't an equality. She was pharaoh for over a generation. This society didn't even give the woman the right to vote until the beginning of this century. And so now the way in which a woman now in this society looks upon her freedom is by a slim cigarette. You've come a long way, baby. That's this society's image of how long. I tell you the truth, women were better off before they started smoking. So you have not come a long way. In fact, you've stepped back a couple of steps. If smoking is your only way of showing your power.
They have more lung cancer than men now.
Yes, just by the natural stress and the way the body is built. There are so many different things that we're looking at in terms of this society that if we begin to get caught up in this and begin to look at what we're looking at from their eyes, we'll make very serious mistakes. And we have to begin to just change around our entire vision. Hatshepsut was totally aware. Hatshepsut was not the only pharaoh. Because we don't know the role of the pharaoh's wife. But if you want to know, look at Queen Tai. Queen Tai will let you know, because Queen Tai came of an age within the 18th dynasty where women truly had great power. In fact, it was Queen Tai who, in fact, it was Hatshepsut who led the way for Queen Tai. And it's important for us to know this and to see this and to put it into place. Hatshepsut had this birth control that's going around now. See, Africa didn't have abortion. Africa didn't have abortion. Africa had birth control. Africa had the ability for a woman to choose when it was her time. And fortunately, it was totally herbal, so whatever happened flushed the system out through an herbal, as opposed to this chemical concoctions that we have today. These are just some of the things that are going on that I just want you to know, because we are not interpreting what our ancestors told us. You could not have had a Queen Tai. Queen Tai was the pharaoh. You have to know that. Queen Tai was pharaoh not only during her husband's time, but her son's time and her grandson's time. She was pharaoh through a whole period, but because a lot of the attention is focused from the Western civilization perspective. You see, there's a lot of things that are there in Africa that we have not been exposed to because Western civilization coming upon it has destroyed it or not played it up. But the woman played a role that without her, the society would have fallen apart completely. There was a total sense of equality. And the reason why Thutmose had a problem with Hatshepsut was not because she was a woman, it was because he wanted to be pharaoh. And she was as much an adversary to him as another man would have been. But Hatshepsut had to do things to him because he wasn't in a position to lead Kemet at that time. And the priesthood was trying to push him into place to throw Hatshepsut out of the way. And Hatshepsut fought them right down the line. And in fact, when you look down the line, we give Akhenaten too much credit because Akhenaten did not create monotheism. There is a place called Sedenga that is dedicated to Tai's husband, Amenhotep III. And there is a place in Aliye, or Atiye, in Sudan, that's dedicated to Tai. And both of these places are temples to Aten. It was Tai and Amenhotep and the 18th dynasty priesthood that taught Akhenaten this concept of Aten. And Aten happened to be in the right place at the right time to be able to espouse this faith system, go to Tel El Amarna, leave the capital of what once was the 18th dynasty capital, go to Tel El Amarna to create his spiritual kingdom while his mother Tai ran the business of Kemet. It was his mother who ran Kemet while he was talking about free at last, like God Almighty were free at last. Akhenaten had a lot of problems. He was a brilliant man, but he was a saint living in hell because he had Asians coming at him from all directions. And he's talking about love all humanity, and the priesthood is trying to tell him, brother, don't you remember the Hyksoks? Don't you remember what they did to our ancestors? And here you talking about going in line. Do you think they care about you? All they're going to do is come in here, take over, and give more room for other people. So they had to get rid of him. So they had to chill him out. And they chilled him out. And then comes Smenkare. After Smenkare comes Tutankhaten. You hear what I said? Tutankhaten. Amen priesthood called him over and said, listen, brother, young brother, in fact, you remember what I did to Akhenaten because of this Aten stuff? You better change your name or we'll do the same to you. So Tutankhaten became Tutankhamun, and that's where you get King Tut from. He accepted the pharaohhood under the Aten priesthood. The Amen priesthood gave him a choice he couldn't refuse. So then he changed his name from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamun and went back into the Amen priesthood. And that began to create the demise of the 18th dynasty going into the 19th dynasty with the Ramessids. Okay, let's go back to the 5th dynasty. Now that I've given you all my... Yes, my sister, sure.
Question about, you were talking about Akhenaten.
Sure.
Wasn't that the time that the royal library, didn't he almost give that away to the Greeks? Was that during his...
To the Greeks?
Yes.
Not really. The Greeks came later. The Greeks came in 332.
Oh, they came in later.
Yeah, Persians were in before the Greeks were. And when I say Greeks, I'm talking about the like Philip. And by the way, it wasn't the Greeks. Philip and Alexander were from Macedonia.
Oh,
They weren't Greek. It was Philip the Macedonian and Alexander the Great. And there really wasn't nothing that much great about them. Because Philip and Aristotle were lovers. And Philip sent his lover with his son because Aristotle was the scholar. And so Aristotle was a little bit more than just a mentor to Alexander. And Alexander wasn't great, by the way. Some people might think he was great, but he was not necessarily great. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, because the Greeks were nowhere near it at this time.
Said, was at the time that Alexander the Great came and studied at the Grand Library, and it started its destruction at that time. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say.
But please know that that library was moved from Upper Kemet into the Delta so that they could have better access to it. So they moved that library up to a place called Alexandria. But that library at one time was deeper into Africa. And I'm going to tell you this, that library still exists. I'm telling you, our African folk are much too intelligent and could see too far down the line to put themselves in that position. But for what our brother George is talking about in terms of us getting back to our consciousness, before we have a right to look at that or to become a part of that, we must become righteous with ourselves. And we have to follow Ma'at. And when we become Ma'at, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Okay, the 5th dynasty was basically between 2563 and 2423. Basically. Again, don't get caught up in dates, but it's good to have a few dates here. Now, this is what happened during the 5th dynasty, which is very important. Number 1, or A, districts began to quarrel with one another. I want you to get into your mind, I'd like to create a picture for you. I'd like to create a very affluent society where even the common people live comfortably. Comfortably, not in luxury. That's for the royalty, nobility, and priesthood. Please understand what the priesthood is. In ancient Kemet, spiritualness was looked upon through education. And that the liberal arts came out of, this liberal arts that we deal with today, came out of the African concept of what education could do to the human being. That it could literally liberate you from your material weights and make you part of the Godhead. Remember going back to the Bible about the tree of knowledge to make you like God? This is where the concept comes from. So Africans went to schools, and please know, while you did have a school for boys only, and when I say boys I mean you also had the same thing for women. Please understand that. Kemet just did not have a mystery system or an educational system for the males. It was for the females also. And the females were taught deep spirituality. They learned to read the oracles, which comes directly out of Ethiopia. The spiritualness, this is what they were trained in doing. They were trained in keeping societies together, while the men were taught the fundamentals of math and science, which was also applied to the women's school. And it's key to know that. Because if you don't, you're going to get a sense that all these men are going through a mystery system and the women are just sitting at home having babies like they say they're supposed to do today. And that's just not true. Women were as active, if not more active, in the African system and the African society as, they were involved more than what we are led to believe. But when you have this society that is doing well, people get comfortable. And they think that tomorrow is going to be like today, and the day after tomorrow is going to be better than the day. You see what I'm saying? All of a sudden, what starts happening? You know, you have children who you don't have much money. And you go from paycheck to paycheck, you don't have much, and all of a sudden you start getting money in, and you start buying things. Normally, that's when the children start fighting. When the children didn't have, they didn't fight because there was nothing to fight over. In fact, they shared more and they loved more because there was less to go around. Once there's affluence, psychologically, you start wanting what George has, and George starts wanting what Booker T has, and then we start getting in trouble. This is psychology. It had nothing to do with folk being African, European, or Asian. This is human personality. That if we're not on guard, our guard will go down, and this is what happened. So what happened? Districts, which are like cities, began to quarrel among each other. Some nomes or districts began to feel as if their patron was more important or better than their neighboring patron. They began to forget their God, basically, and they began to quarrel with each other. Quarreling began to lead to just outright riot in the street, fighting each other. Another problem, or B, or number 2, is that the Pharaoh began to give large land grants to the priesthood and nobility. You know how, like, when Chrysler gets in trouble, they get their biggest welfare check?
Yep.
That's the biggest welfare check the United States government ever wrote. That was welfare. When these educational grants come out and people get grants, that's welfare. So don't tell me this little chicken feed you give a family that's barely making it is a freeloader on the government, when the biggest freeloaders on the government is a military complex. 3, or C, the Nubians, realizing the instability of the north, realized that that instability in Kemet would lead to instability in their land, because if the Asians got there, the next step would be to come to Nubia. So the Nubians began to move north against their brothers and sisters in Kemet. And particularly the priesthood. The priesthoods of Nubia went against the priesthoods of ancient Kemet. So that when you see Christians, Baptists fighting Methodists, here you get a sense that there's spiritual inconsistencies the same way it happened back then.
Is this the palette of Norm theory to speak?
No, this is coming later. This is the 5th dynasty. What happening with Narmer and Menes happened back in the pre-dynastic going into the dynastic period, which was, let's just give it a date of 3,200 years before the Christian era, which it doesn't have to be. But let's say that was 3,200.
Yeah.
We're talking now about 2563. So we're, I mean, a lot has happened since Menes. I mean, the pyramids were built, and Hotep came about, and things like that. And the whole structure of the central government.
But the same system developed again, that the northern part of Egypt became, less spiritual. They were not following the ways of the deities, or the spiritual ways. So therefore, the southern part had to come up and move against them.
But you also at this time have Asians coming, infiltrating little by little into the delta. So you have more Asians now coming into the system. And the Nubians are aware of this. Because please know that there are Nubians who are the colonists of Kemet. You see, the governors and many of the people of these nomes come from the southern lands. So what they're beginning to do is that they're calling back to Khartoum and they're telling the Kanemu priesthood, wait a minute, we have a problem up here. There's instability, there's riots, and there are people coming in the north. So the Nubians in the south said, well, we have to put a hold on this. And if you look at what happened down the line in the future, what the Nubians were afraid of is what happened. Once Kemet was the doorway to Africa. And once the Asians got into there, that's when a lot of things started happening. So the Asians are infiltrating in the north in small numbers during the same 5th dynasty. And because of the instability of the land, what they start doing is instigating. For instance, let me just draw you a picture. You and I are fighting each other. Someone else comes in that neither of us know. We don't know him. Neither of us are fighting with him. He can act as an instigator between you and I. Instead of us joining heads and saying, wait a minute, man, I got a problem with you. Fine. But he's a bigger problem. This is not what happened. Because of greed. So he began to instigate me. He began to instigate you. And pretty soon, he got us fighting each other. And all of a sudden, when we stopped fighting, we realized he got all the land. And we don't have a thing. You see the psychology of it. I just want to break it visually for you to see what's happening because it's real. And this is what happened. Because of this, these four things, the fighting among the districts, the Pharaoh giving land grants, the Nubians coming into the north, and the Asians coming in from the Nubians coming in from the south into the north, and the Asians coming in from the north into the south, along comes the total collapse of the Kemetic system, and the first intermediate period occurs between the dynasties of 7 to 11. These dynasties approximately 2242 to 2065 years before the Christian era. Again, please don't get caught up in dates, but it is good to know the chronology of this. Now, what is happening during the 7th and the 11th dynasty? Please know, basically, African folks still are in control of the government. But you return back to the time prior to Menes, where you have petty kingdoms. You don't have the official nomes anymore. You have, like, for instance, St. Albans and Jamaica. I don't know if St. Albans is considered part of Jamaica. It is. Okay, let's take two different parts of Jamaica. Rochdale and St. Albans. How is that? Am I closer?
Rochdale.
Rochdale, sorry.
You're right, Rochdale.
Let's start. Rochdale and St. Albans. Now, at one time, we were all queens together. All of a sudden now, we start saying, wait a minute, no, I'm not going to go for that. Because George is my leader here in St. Albans. And they say, yeah, but Kwame is mine in Jamaica. I mean in Rochdale. And all of a sudden, instead of having one united nome or city, you have St. Albans represented by somebody, and you have Rochdale represented by somebody. You see what's happening? That's what happens when you break down in terms of power. Petty, when I say petty, I don't mean unimportant, because some were important, but what I mean is that you didn't have the central government anymore. So it breaks down, more fighting occurs, but unfortunately you have more Asian migrations taking advantage of what Africans are doing to themselves in Kemet. The Nubians say, I don't care what you do in Kemet, but if you cross the border into Nubia, that's it. We will take care of it. What they did allow to happen was they allowed the royalty and the Ma'atian following Africans in Kemet to return back to Ethiopia. to become part of the government again, to continue their training, to stay with the families, and the rest of that. They returned home and they built their strength up to once again. You know how the dictator of Kuwait, you know, they call him the emir, you know. They call Saddam Hussein the dictator, and they call the other one the emir of Kuwait, yet there's very little difference between either because they're both dictators. And that's very important to know. And I was reading an article, I think in the City Sun or the Amsterdam News, that was talking about what the Kuwaitis now are doing to the Palestinians and how it's such a very serious problem. Because everything, you know, this one, well, that's something people told me the other day. But again, you know, I don't really want to get caught up in the contradictions because we know that they are contradictory by nature. But what I do want to begin to at least show you how today relates back to yesterday. And how it's very important for us to understand that while conditions change, human nature does not. And that's why we have to know what the nature is representing. That's why when I introduced them to you, I introduced them to you on different levels so that you can understand the whole picture of what the African drama was about life. Was that you have a certain personality that's impacted by your environment. And how you decide to relate to that determines the outcome of the situation. And the same is true here. What the ancients experienced back then is what we're experiencing today, except there are differences. And that is that in many ways we don't have control, because in Africa, the reason why they could keep coming back and come back stronger was because no matter what the case was, the society still was based on a spiritual philosophy. This society is not built on a spiritual philosophy. So even if you want to go back to correct the problems that we've had, when George is saying that you've got to scrap the whole thing, you must. Because the foundation of a building is what makes it rest. And if it's on shaky ground, it's going to fall. Because once you start building a building, you must continue to build up. The same way with the personality, and it's true. And what the foundation of this society is built on murder and enslavement. That's what it's built on. It's built on the murder of the indigenous population and the enslavement of every other people of the world, climaxing with the East Indian. Yes, with the East Indian, because the East Indian was enslaved. And the East Indian in the Caribbean still doesn't know that he was enslaved. He was given a couple of pennies. You see, the East Indian was brought into the Caribbean to fight amongst the African. Because remember we talked about labor and capitalism? You cannot have a capitalist system and have slavery. But you can have a capitalist system and have people work for peanuts. So instead of giving the peanuts to the Africans in the Caribbean, they brought East Indians in. The British did this in order for them to do the manual labor. But we, as the Africans, were really the main group that were enslaved and held hostage. So this is what this country is built on. When you look at the African society, no matter how bad they may have been, and they were bad, some were acting bad, they still had a spiritual base to return to, and this is how you have the coming again of the 18th dynasty and the 25th dynasty, because there was something always that they could latch on to build the society again. Do you remember the gods of our ancestors? Now, none of us can say that to each other. Not one of us can say, do you remember the gods of our ancestors? And if we do, what we're really doing is researching. Brothers from the Osara Set community, Samaj, my brother Samaj Heru is another one. And then we have others also, Raketi Wimby, Roosevelt Robinson from Chicago. These are all brothers and sisters who are getting back to the ancient ancestor, but we don't, and yet they did at that time. So that was their saving grace. More fighting occurred between the 7th and 11th dynasty until the Intef pharaohs came about. Of the 11th, Intef the first, I-N-T-E-F, Intef the second, and Intef the third. What they began to do is that they began to unify Kemet, and guess what was decreased? What do you think was decreased? Think of what the problem was, and think of what was done to decrease that problem. They put strict rules on the Asians in terms of coming into the country. What do you think they might have done to the Pharaoh? It's the opposite of what Gorbachev tried to do in the Soviet Union.
He gave him more.
Less power. Because I don't know if you realize this or not, but Gorbachev is trying to get more power. He's not diminishing his power then. He's making it appear that he's relinquishing his power and separating it out. That's why he went back into Lithuania.
So
That's a cover.
they became more involved in the decision. In other words, what you're saying is by them coming in on the scene, the Pharaoh's power lessens, and they become more involved again as priests, or how is that?
The power of the Pharaoh and the power of the priesthood was diminished, and more power went into the hands of the people in order to offset the problems that occurred prior to that with the Pharaoh, predominantly Pepi I and Pepi II. One Pharaoh reigned for over 55 years. He died when he was 98. The man was sent out. The priesthood took advantage of him. In his young years, Pepi was a wonderful Pharaoh and a good person, but when he got older, he was taken advantage of. And the priesthood was the one that really did take advantage of him. So they lessened the power. The Imtems lessened the power of the Pharaoh, and they were Pharaohs themselves. But they knew through Ma'at what would make the nation right. So they relinquished their power, which is opposite to what we hear today. Nobody giving up anything without a fight. But they understood what would make the society work, and they knew they had to answer to a higher authority. So they lessened the power of the Pharaoh. They, being Pharaoh, said, I will give this power up. And then came Mentuhotep. Mentuhotep was the one that unified Kemet once again and brought the Middle Kingdom into existence.
Excuse me. You know, you're saying here now that the priests themselves, they started to abuse the powers of their office, and they used the Pharaoh to gain land and stuff like that. And on the other hand, you're saying now that they combined to take away the power of the Pharaoh?
No, the Pharaoh did.
The Pharaoh themselves did.
The Pharaoh. The Pharaoh, in talking to the people, told them, and I personally don't have documentation to this, but it's in your reading, that to unify our country, we must all come together, and that what began to happen is that the chipping away of the Pharaoh as a God concept. And that the Pharaoh could be questioned. You see, and that the Pharaoh was not God.
So consequently, because of this, the priests would lose power.
Yes. And you're going to see this problem occurring again in the 18th dynasty. You're going to see this problem with the priesthood again. Come in the 18th dynasty with Akhenaten. See, the priesthood, this is what I meant to. In Africa, if you got an education, you were a priest or a priestess. You just didn't, you couldn't go to school without studying spirituality to the level that you yourself became a priest. That's why you had to go to school 33 years. Sometimes, some people say 33, some people say 40. I'm not going to argue either way, but you did have to go past college. That would be compared to here. You were much older when you left the African school system than you were when you left the American school system. So you had to be well versed in spirituality. So anybody going through the educational system was a priest or a priestess. The architect was a priest. The scribe who wrote was a priest. In today's society, if you were an elevator operator, you'd be a priest. A priest doesn't mean what it means today. And the reason why a priest means what it means today is because it's a business. It costs money to become a priest. The priesthood, the order, has to pay for this individual to go to the seminary. And they got to get their money from someplace. See, the church is a business. Church today is a business. Not all churches. Yes, all churches. Yes, no, it is. It is, because their livelihood depends on their congregation giving them money. And that's the life of the church. If the minister is of such that he can minister to his congregation, that he can rise or raise the spiritual level in his congregation, then the congregation feels as if this is the place to be in order to deal with my spirituality. Therefore, the support of the church comes in. Where we go wrong with that is what we're willing to tell people we can do for them in the name of God. Because none of us can do anything in the name of God. And if we even attempt to it, I do not want to be there when your heart is weighed. So in terms of the priesthood had to relinquish its power because the people were behind the Pharaoh, not the priesthood. The priesthood had already lost. The priesthood were run. Read a book. It's by Bika Reed, Bikareed. Now this is additional readings. It's called Rebel in the Soul. And this is a papyri written by a scribe describing what the streets and what the atmosphere looked like in ancient Kemet during the intermediate periods. Brother fighting brother, sister cannot trust brother, babies fighting each other, murders in the street. I mean, it sounds like the New York Times reporting on us. That's just what it sounds like, and it's so important. Yes, my brother.
I'm trying to relate with myself and making a comment.
But I don't want you to blow up on me, so go ahead.
No, see, you're talking about these priesthoods and stuff like that, and describing the nature of this change. What it is at that time, it was the direct violation of the cosmic laws of nature at the time. Early before Kemet and all that stuff, they did worship the deities of nature from a cosmetic plane, from the cosmos. See, it's when they went astray into people, places, and things, let's say, commoditary values, tangible things.
Let me give you an example, and I think you might understand what I'm talking about. They would take a statue through the town, and they would have the people worship this statue and place things at the statue. Well, they do the same thing at the San Gennaro feast, so, you know, we're talking reality here. And the people were made to believe that the more money you place at the feet of this icon, and this is an icon now, an icon is an image. They believed that the more money you put at the icon's feet was the more blessings that you would get, and the money that was the money did not do anything for the icon. It went into the pocket of the priesthood in order for the priesthood, if the chariot, if the 2065 newest mode of chariot was out, the priest could buy it. You know, like the 1991 Cadillac? Same thing. Same thing. So it's according to where the money of the spiritual person goes. And what began to happen is that the people began to see the priesthood in positions of great power, and they were talking about the piousness of poverty. And while the people were poor and pious, the priesthood was rich and doing very well. I'm sure they would have owned amusement parks at that time if they had them then, or the Cadillacs. You see, this goes into the hypocrisy of what we're facing. And this is why the problems sometimes that I faced when I present at churches, because many people do not care for the fact that I strongly believe that the poorest person in your community church should be your minister. Because the very person that minister worships, have you ever heard Jesus say he's going home?
Going home.
Did you ever hear him say he had something at home? Or that he was going? Have you ever heard of the concept of Jesus the Christ having a home? The brother was homeless. He's just like these homeless people out here on the street. You know, the ones that are ranting and raving about God? That's what he looked like.
And very knowledgeable. You have to talk to those minutes.
That's right. I came upon a sister, made more sense to me. I said, well, you know, I mean, she said, things are just bad, you know. Her luck ran out. Job wasn't good. You know, this Jesus the Christ walked the earth with one sandal because the brother couldn't buy a pair of sandals. He had to eat in other people's homes. And yet the very people who are espousing this philosophy are the richest among us. I have a problem with that. I have a problem with your basic idea. Jesus the Christ would come out of the desert after days of being in the desert, meditating and praying, come out thirsty. Somebody would say, here, Master Teacher, here's a glass of water. The brother would be holding a glass of water and he'd see a child thirstier than he. And he saw redemption in that type of suffering, that he would give the water to this child, for the child to drink, and he would do without. Now, this is the man that I vision. When people say, when I say Jesus is my Lord and Savior, coming from an African perspective, he showed me how to act. He showed me that if you do for someone, you will get back sevenfold. It may not be right away, but it'll be down the line when you need it the most. And if you have that kind of faith in yourself and in your God, then it will happen. Yes, my sister.
You know, I agree with you on that. I mean, that's just something I was trying to figure out. It seems that we as a people do that to all of our ministers. And I was wondering if it appears to still be an African tradition in that the ministers, or it's like the minister seems to be a modern day king, you know, in terms of on the West African coast. I'm not sure if I'm correct, but that's the way I see it. Because one of the arguments even for Reverend Flake's trial was that this is the tradition of the black church, that we take care of our ministers. And it's true.
Yes.
It's very true.
Yes.
And yet you see that same thing with the kingship along the west coast of Africa, that the people take very good care of their kings. The kings have the finest, and so forth. And I was wondering if you could kind of speak to that. I mean, is that it seems to come from a tradition that we have among ourselves. There's no negating it, but I do see the same thing that you referred to before in terms of a spiritual leader. Most of them who are about serious spirituality do not possess this vast amount of wealth.
In the African concept of what you're talking about, if that individual needed something, that individual could go to that leader and get it. Do you see what I'm saying? If someone was hungry, it is also African. See, African tradition, well, let me step back. It is by no mistake that almost all of our leaders have been from the spiritual world. Okay? All of them. When you go down the line, you have Reverend Richard Allen. You have Nat Turner, who was a minister. There are exceptions to this rule, but when you look at a Dr. King, a Malcolm X, Honorable Elijah Muhammad, people say, well, you see, people always try to get, how about the Honorable Marcus Mosiah? He had an entire African church in his movement. He canonized his own bishops. He had his own nuns. He had his own priests. He had his own peace. The whole peace was right there, even though he was not a spiritual man. He understood the need for spirituality. So it is by no mistake that almost all of our leaders, Reverend Jesse Jackson, almost all of them, are coming from a spiritual perspective, because that is the way that we are. And now lately we're changing somewhat, you know, but I mean, a lot of our congressmen, you'd be surprised. Fauntleroy is a minister. I didn't know Fauntleroy was a minister, but there's a lot of congresspeople who are ministers. William Gray, Andrew Young. I didn't know William Gray was either. But you can see the concept. Now, let's look at that concept as our leaders coming out of the spiritual world. See, we can't separate the two. They will tell you the reason why we deal with the spiritual is because the Bible was the only book that we were allowed to read. That's not true. We weren't allowed to read the Bible either. So that's not true. The Bible was read to us. So it wasn't that it was because we read the Bible that we lean more towards spirituality. We are a spiritual people. Our reason to be is spiritual. When we get up in the morning, I'm not going to ask you to say this, but how many of us thank God for that? Let's take it from another perspective. Look at the awards ceremony. I have seen maybe one or two, I can count on my hands, the amount of African folk I've seen receive an award, whether they be of European or African, whether it be Oscar, Emmy, or whatever, that does not say, I first want to thank God. It is part of our nature. And you see, we're going to lose ourselves if we ever think that that's not a part of our nature. We always took care of our ministers because our ministers always took care of us. That's what Jesus was about. You see, Jesus, whether you believe in Jesus or not, makes me absolutely no difference at all, because it's not going to impact you either way. Whether you believe that there was an individual who lived at a particular time that did a certain thing. I happen to believe in many different things, but I happen to believe that Jesus Christ was a movement and not a person. But that's to be discussed. I've come upon a lot of different books within the past 3 years that has directed me towards understanding what was going on at a particular time. And you have to look at astrology and astronomy to wonder how people could clearly define the day somebody was born when 5,000 years earlier, an African said that Usia was born on that day. So I kind of lose track in people telling me about certain things, but I don't lose track in the persona of what this person or this group represented. So our priesthood has always taken care of us. Anything we needed, they would do without. Yes, we did want to heap the best on them because remember, they represented to us the very best that life had to offer. And if someone was willing to give up all of the things in life that they could, because you know the Pharaoh's life was not an easy life. You may think him walking around and with all this honor and glory, it was not an easy life. For good pharaohs, it was a life he couldn't be with the people. He couldn't do a lot of the things that he wanted to do. And there were a lot of hardships that the pharaoh had to experience. So it's not something that was a wonderful life that he made major decisions. So you're absolutely right. It is within us to take care of our community, but it is also, may I ask you this, is his church Allen AME, his church over here? Yeah, this one with this fleet of buses out here?
Yeah.
Oh, Lord. Where go with them buses? Hey, let me tell you. Anyway, I think it's important to understand that the priests, the ministers, ministered to the people and were responsible to him. So that there was no such thing as that the person was hungry. Because if this person who was hungry came to the minister, which was his obligation to do, and say, "Minister, I have nothing to eat." The minister gave him food. "I have nothing to wear." The minister gave him clothes. "I have no place to live. Stay here." You remember what Jesus said? If you clothe, feed, and what was it? Clothe, feed, and shelter the least of mine, brothers and sisters, you do it for me. This comes out of the African mindset. This is how you know that Jesus was black. Because there's nothing I've seen a European do that any way relates to what I've seen this Jesus Christ do. Because since this man, first of all, they were the ones that crucified him. That's the first. So I have problems with that. Plus the fact that they sent all the Christians to the lions to kill. The only group of people I know that has experienced something like that have been people of color. Being thrown to the lions. Having to always do the worst of jobs. So I can see the Africanness in all of this, so it's very important for us to know this. It's by no mistake that our leaders are from the spiritual world. We normally gravitate towards it.
With the priesthood, was that something that was inherited from one body to the next? Or, I mean, usually it's an aristocrat that go into that. So what I'm saying is even during that time, I read that, you know, they usually came from the wealthy families.
Yes, they did.
Now, so most of them came from that. It's not
Yes.
like you could just step into it.
That's right. But see, look at what goes on now. Who would be best to be able to take on that role? You have someone who first of all, for whatever reason, was in the royal family, was able to get the kinds of monies and the type of background to expose them to all of the things that they could deal with. You have someone who's working the fields as a farmer who was never exposed. See, remember Egypt's problem. Kemet's problem is that they held the most important information away from the common people, from the masses, and only kept it in the few. In Nubia and in Ethiopia, it was common amongst everybody. In Kemet, because you had so many different peoples coming in and out, you could not give this to just anybody because you didn't know who was going to get it. So you had to keep it very controlled. In Nubia, you didn't have that problem. So anybody could ascend the throne, which happened in Nubia and Ethiopia. That people ascended the throne by what they call the touching of hands. See, Europeans have a big game with this about the touching of hands. The African elders knew who was going to be the pharaoh. The touching of the hands was meant to be a spiritual type thing. You know, just to go through the motions of my cosmic order touching your cosmic order and saying, you are the one. But they knew who was going to be, just like Miss America. They know who's going to be Miss America before Miss America pageants. Now, I don't mean to placate or to lower by using the analogy, but in Ethiopia, they knew who was going to be the pharaoh. The touching of the hands was only a ceremony to bring them through it. Yes?
Yeah, well, how do you feel, and this goes back to something related to what Diane was talking about too, Monet in the Ivory Coast, this huge cathedral that he built. Now, how do we look at that?
How do we?
Yeah, we're looking at a country, and we know that there are people there who are, you know, who are in impoverished situations.
Yes.
And yet you have a president who builds this huge cathedral. Now, I don't know. I mean, who am I to question that? Because I don't know what's going on.
Okay.
Maybe you can shed some light.
Well, you know, I always tell people about magicians. You know, the worst thing you can do to a magician, or the worst thing you can do to try to figure out, let me take it back to something that we all can understand. You know the three-card model?
Yes.
What's the worst thing to do if you want to win?
Keep your eyes on it.
Say it.
Keep your eyes on it.
That's right. To keep your eyes on it. Do you know what was just convened in Ivory Coast?
The conference with Reverend Coleman.
You know, when you bring a pope in to bless your land, a lot of times society don't have too much to say about what you do on that land. Now, I don't quite understand, well, I can't really say because I don't know that much, but I do know that this conference is probably one of the most important conferences ever held. More important than the Band Done. And if Hopefully Boyne is a magician, what he's done is he's had everybody focus on the cathedral and not have you look at this conference that he just put together.
No, university complex.
No, he didn't, but he could have said no good.
Oh, yes, true.
And he could have, you know, he is the mastermind that allowed it to come in. So what I often tell people, see, I mean, building a big church like that with people and hunger and all that, I understand. And I don't know, it's hard to say.
I understand he has an academic complex right before that, though. That's outside. That's even more imposing than the cathedral itself. So that's what I hear. I don't know.
Yeah, and you know, you never know what that brother going to want to do with that cathedral in about 100 years.
Yeah, it's just puzzling.
You know what I'm saying? No, I question it also. I question it particularly since the Pope himself didn't want to come.
He was reluctant, right?
He was reluctant because he said, here you got a country full of people who are in need, and you're building the greatest cathedral in the world. And that's what it is. But part of the reason why the Pope didn't want to go there is because he didn't want to bless the greatest cathedral in the world. There's a lot of things going on here. Yes, my sister.
From what I understand, Dr. Jason, he had gone over there. He said it was a whole city that he built, and there were universities and everything. The Western world didn't tell the whole story. And he's trying to think of Imhotep and this, you know, if they were thinking along the same lines.
That's right.
So he brought up the cathedral. You know, everybody's going to say it's extravagant, blah, blah, blah. But they didn't tell the whole story.
And see, this is the problem. And this is why I always, unless I know a lot about something, I tend to want to be careful with the things that I say. And I know that the Western civilization shows us what they want us to know. And I always attempt, on behalf of my people, to reserve anything negative to say until I can see that it's actually negative. Yes, my brother and my sister.
You know, you've been talking here, and what keeps going through my mind is something I read in George Wilson. Anyway, Destruction of Black Civilization. Chance Win, right, okay. His part there, one of the last black civilizations I think he's talking about, that particular chapter, where he said that there were two societies, or two sections, this one big society. And they wanted to merge to make it just one. But rather than fight, somehow or the other, the two people, they just talked about their ruler. And they continually talked about him. And they heaped a lot of praise upon him. And the people, it was eventually united into one, because one particular people praised their leader a whole lot more than the others could. And the others just gave up. They said, well, no, we can't think of any more, plaudits or anything to put on our leader the way you have. And so they elevated their leader by the praise. And I'm just thinking, in this particular term, elevating something by building a big cathedral, elevating, a pharaoh by a pyramid. I mean, it's elevating the power of God itself. They said this God is the greatest of all. That's why all these Asians had to come into Kemet to look at it, to see how powerful these things work. You know, I mean, it just went out throughout the world. What was happening right here?
It's key. My sister.
I just want to say in reference to the Ivory Coast, I don't know, maybe Joyce could say something, but in '87 we went there, and we were there for a few days. And just from being there, I'm not surprised at this latest development, because to me, that place was more French than France, okay? The people do not come from their own perspective in any way. They seem to relate a lot in terms of the French, European French. And I wasn't impressed with it at all. I would never go back to the Ivory Coast. And I also heard from other Africans that that is a place that is not respected.
Well, you know, that's good to know. And it's good for her to say, because I couldn't supply that information. I've not been, I went to school with his daughter, Goofy boy. And, wow. You know, the system has done a very serious job on us. And it's something that we don't really realize. Because we're so caught up in our own problems every day, we don't realize that we could free ourselves today if we chose. But this system is so backwards. I mean, I have heard black folk talk worse about black folk. And I mean, well, they've just done a very serious job that we have got to begin to at least look at and to at least begin change. But I think that what we're talking about today, we can begin to see that it didn't start with us here in America. We started this amongst ourselves back here. Okay. Now, what began to happen is that, please keep in mind that more Asians are coming in small numbers, not big numbers. And this is the problem, because when they're coming in small numbers, you never really get a sense of how many are there. So they're coming in small numbers. By 1785, or 1785 years before the Christian era, the Asians on the inside were strong enough to tell the Asians on the outside that you now may attack Kemet, which they did, which was the Hyksos invasion. The Hyksos came in, known as shepherd kings. They were totally uncivilized. They had absolutely no concept of city life, and they had absolutely nothing to offer Africa. The only thing that they did was to destroy what the Africans built up. If they're known for anything, they will be known for attempting to destroy what the Africans put in place. They didn't come from a civilization. Some of them were farmers, weren't that great. Please know that these were bus stops. You see, you have a story of Abraham. To me, is symbolic of this Asian movement. Starting out of Ur, U-R, which is in the Mesopotamian area. You know the place that they just bombed? From the Tigris-Euphrates River. But now please remember that at one point in time, you have African folk at the 51st parallel. All up in here. All of these civilizations in here are African. Then you have the Asian moving back down and situating themselves in this area here. And they're beginning to now come through. This is where they came through right here. Where's the Tigris and, oh, here's Kuwait. Okay, here's the Tigris Euphrates. They're coming up through here, and everywhere that they go, please don't be surprised that the capital of Jordan is called Amman. That was an African nation named after Amun-Ra. You have them coming in, and in this area, every place that they go, here first of all, they had to conquer African people. Ancient Sumerians, Elamites, Akkadians. They came down with no culture, learned a little bit of culture, learned a little bit of language, settled here. They were expelled by the Africans, and they had to move this way. So they moved this way into Canaan, another African nation, mixed with the people again, and they came through here. This is why it took so long for them to get here. So around 1785, you have them coming into Kemet, after having been to all of these different areas, picking up all of the culture and civilization from Africans, and that's how they knew how to deal with Kemet so well. So you have them coming in, Hyksos. They have nothing to offer, and they rule basically this part of Kemet, which is the Delta area. It's a discussion as to how long. Some people say 75 years, some people say 100, I even heard 200. Don't make a difference. They were kicked out. That's the key. Okay, they were kicked out. They held power in this area of Kemet. Never did they have power in Upper Kemet. They never had power over Upper Kemet. Remember, the priesthood of Kemet, after this Hyksos invasion, returned back down into Ethiopia, Nubia, began to develop themselves. And by approximately 1570, they were ready again to make another surge north to reconquer Kemet. Sekenereus and Noctere. A lot of people give Akhmosis the credit for it. It was not Akhmosis. It's important to know. Just like it wasn't Narmer, it was his father Ka that began. And even Ka's father began. It's important to know this. It's not so much to get caught up over Menkera or to get caught up over Khafra. What's important to do is to understand that even before Khufu, you had his father who was able to put something in place. So that's very important. Or Seneferu. Seneferu was Khufu's father. There's a pyramid to Seneferu. So it's important not to get caught up in any one person, because it was passed down from generation to generation, which is something that we need to do with our young people. See, if we got this familial concept and we handed things down to our children, this whole concept, and it is not alien to us, because everything that we have built has been built on us handing things down to our children. You see, the Kronos complex didn't impact us. What the Kronos complex is opposite the African world. The Kronos complex says that I want to do better than my parents, but I don't want my children to do better than me. Therefore, the civilization stagnates. That's European society. Western society, I should say, because some of us are doing it to each other. The African society says, everything I inherited from my family, I am going to do something good with to improve it, not so that people will say I was better than them, but so that they, in their mightiness, will say that we bequeathed something great to our children. So in other words, we want to do good for our ancestors because we want to show them that we're deserving of it. So the Kronos complex don't even come into play. And everything that we learn, we want to perfect it and hand it to our children in a way that not only will they master it, but they will make it better. So I tell our young people, hey, don't get caught up in the pyramids and just open your mouth and be in awe of the pyramids. Look at the pyramids and think about what you want to build. And think in terms of building it better. Don't get caught up in just what you see. The ancestors would be ashamed of us if all we wanted to do was replicate what they did. They say, hey, we did that. We want you to do something far greater than that. And that's what we've got to begin to do for our young people. And there is no better way to show it than in the 18th dynasty. They ruled for over 250 years. This one family of Kemites ruled 250 years, longer than the United States of America. I'm going to say that again. All this hoopla about 1777 and all the rest of that doesn't touch. From 1777, from this point, does not house the amount of time that one family ruled Africa. Now that's greatness. One family for 250 years not only ruled the country, but raised it to a very high level of technology and spirituality. Okay, Akhmosis totally expelled the Hyksos and started the 18th dynasty. Okay, it's important to understand that the ruling families of the 18th dynasty included the Nubians, the Ethiopians, and the Kemites. Again, I want to stress to you, do not get caught up in these artificial boundaries. These boundaries were created in 1885 by Europe during the Berlin Conference. Please note that the reason why Hatshepsut could go to Puani or to Punt and visit her family there was because this whole area was related. It's important to know that she could leave Kemet, her having family from here was there, family from here went there. These were a very talented family. And they had family all over the place because this was a large kingdom. There was even a relationship between this kingdom and the Monomotapa. And it's very important for us because, see, they put us in little boxes. So that if we think we're talking about a Kemite and Nubian people, we think we're talking about two separate people. We're talking about the same people, but they just live in someplace else. I live in Co-op City. Some of you live in St. Albans, but we're still the same people. And the same is true for here. But because of these artificial boundaries created by Europe, we honestly think this is Libya, this is Chad, this is Africa. And African people live here. Okay. The Grand Lodge. Important thing to understand about the Grand Lodge is the Ipit. The Ipit means in the African language, the Ipit, by the way, is the Grand Lodge itself. It is known as the holy place. Karnak is Ipit Isut, which is the most select of holy places. It is very important when you're looking at this temple. Remember, we spoke about this temple earlier, about the spiritual development of the human being. This also reflects in terms of the temple, in terms of the structure of the human body. It was built in the direct proportion of a human body. For instance, yes?
I was wondering if you could put that down. I know the spelling, but I was wondering, I don't think...
Okay, you know, okay, let me do something here, and I'm hoping that I can do this. Okay. What I'd like to do is I would like to show you. By the way, you'll be getting this lesson plan next week. I had to work hard to get this lesson plan together this week, so at least I got last week's lesson for you. What I'd like to do is I'd like to show you this because I think it's important for you to at least see. This is the Grand Lodge of Luxor. When you're looking at the Grand Lodge of Luxor from an aerial view, you're looking from up in the air, you're looking down on it like this. This is south. This is north. This is west. And this is east. Okay? Now, what's interesting about this temple was that, number one, it was built with the entire temple mapped out. Remember we talked about the pyramids? When Imhotep did the pyramids, he not only did the concept of the step pyramid, but he also laid out the further research that was needed to perfect the pyramid. So not only was Imhotep the master or the builder of the step pyramid, but he also was the one that laid the groundwork for Sneferu, Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure to build the perfect pyramid. The same is true for here. The architects of this structure built the whole piece. And then this was like this, for instance, is a colonnade of Ramses. Ramses of the 19th dynasty put this one in place. But the earlier dynasties put all of this in place. So each pharaoh put a different part of the temple together, but all they were doing was carrying out the archaeological direction of the earlier ancestor that drew the whole piece. Do you get a concept of what I'm saying? These are some heavy Africans. Not only can they conceptualize the future, but those born in the future can conceptualize the past and put it in place. It's key to know that. Because today's society can't do that. Bless you. Today's society can't do that. Today's society can only deal with what they have. And they have a difficulty in going back to pick up where others have left off. And that goes back to the Cronus complex. I'm sorry, my brother? Say why for me.
The reason why was he wasn't there to be able to talk about it.
Explain.
The reason why this society today cannot go back and talk about it because they have no place in that at that time.
No, I'm not necessarily talking about this, George. I'm talking about in general. Everything that they build, they don't have a concept of picking up from somebody else.
Exactly.
This took many years to build. Many, many years to build. And it was wonderful how they were able to do this. But what's important to understand is that this is the covered temple. Remember we said that this was about the infant, and this was 2.5 to 3, and this. Now we're going to superimpose a whole new dynamic on this temple now, where the ancients said that this is the covered temple. Bless you. And that this represented the human head. And in this temple, when you go into the different rooms, it will define for you the functions of the head. In Medunetia. That's heavy. Okay? Now, you get down here to the hypostyle hall. The first hypostyle hall, if you were to go and relate it back, see, this is what I mean when you have to gather information. This picture is in the book, this picture is in the book. But what we have to do as an African people is take this picture and put them side by side. That's what we have to do in curriculum development. The information is there, we just got to put it together. What the ancients said was that this, the hypostyle hall, represented the neck and the shoulders. They went further into the peristyle hall, and the peristyle hall represented the chest and the stomach. They went down further into the colonnade of Amun, and this was the thighs and the leg. The reproductive organ is also located right in this area. And they represented the reproductive organ by men. They represented by men in mummified form. And you know, in mummified form, you have the feet here, and then you have it like this. But what they did is that they had an erect penis, not where a penis would be, but where the umbilical cord is, to show the balance of male and female. You know, these people real heavy here. Because they're able to take a man, and you see, this is what I say as men, we have got to say we're half women. When people come to us and they say, what does Women's History Month mean to you? We have got to respond as men. I'm talking about as men knowing we're men. Women's history is important to me because I'm half a woman and I need to know about half of myself. Not about it's important because women are our counterparts and women are important to the... I'm half a woman. And the women in this room, you are half men. But by the magic of your daddy's chromosome, whether it be the X or the Y, hooking up with your mother's egg, decided whether or not I'd be male and you'd be female. That's the true accident of birth. It's not an accident, it's an occurrence of birth. And the Africans were totally aware of this. So on a pharaoh's body, they would demonstrate the female counterpart to the male counterpart. Yes?
And is this the region where the White Chapel is at? You know what I'm talking about? When we went into when we were in Kemet and we went into this temple, I think it's called the White Chapel, where on the walls those belly figures are there. And I was wondering if that was representative of what you're saying.
Did you see men there?
Huh?
Did you see men? Was it in the Ipit or was it Ipit? Was it Karnak or was it Grand Lodge? Do you remember?
I know it was where our moon was at. I know that.
No, then you're talking about Karnak. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
I get confused with that too, the Karnak and the Lodge. Is that because half of it is down this way, or, you know, I always got confused with the whole concept of the Lodge. To understand, because half of it is located in Karnak, and the other half is...
They were two buildings that were intricately related to each other, but served two different purposes. One was the holy place, and the other was the select of the holy places.
So the Lodge was the...
Lodge was more the educational building. And that's why you have a lot of chapels in Karnak. That's from what I basically see. There's still much more research to be done. Because remember, this is the area where between Karnak and the Grand Lodge that you had 1.5 miles of sphinxes that connected it. And you know you have in the Catholic Church and the Episcopal Church the High Mass, where you see the priest will walk, there's a flock of saints that will walk, the altar boys, the choir boys, the main priest is up there, and you got the other priests that are walking with him. It's the same thing that would happen in Karnak. That whole concept of the procession came out of Karnak, where they would leave Karnak and go to the Grand Lodge. Or they might go to the Grand Lodge and go to Karnak. But that whole concept of having a procession, they used to go down the Avenue of Sphinxes. See, now the streets will divide. So you don't have a sense of where those streets were. But Karnak and Luxor were connected by this Avenue of Sphinxes. Today you have streets and roads and merchants all through there. So you can't truly get, unless you were up in the air and looking down, and you could actually picture what that avenue must have looked like. Okay, so you get down in this area here, which is the colonnade of Amun, the thighs and the leg, and then you get to the court of Ramses, which is the knees, the shins, and the feet. And all of the functions. Now, there are two ways that the body is shown here. It's shown on profile. It's shown on profile when you need to see certain things that are internal of the body, and when you need to see things that are right, left in nature, you will see the body with the face pointing this way. People say, how do you know which way it faces? It faces east. People say, how do you know? Because the whole function of the spinal cord is written on the west wall, where the spinal cord would be. The pineal gland is in a secret sanctuary. You see, because the pineal is a secret law, secret cosmic law. But now check this out, which I find interesting. You know when you're eating and you choke, it's because air has gotten down when you're eating or something like that, but you have something in you that closes to let food go in. Say it again. Say it again. Tongue palate? Okay, whatever it is that closes off, that allows you to eat and not allow air, it's a flap. It's like a valve. A valve will close when air is coming, it'll open, but it will not allow, you say something went down my windpipe. Where that is located on the human body, you can't open both doors. You can only open up one door. In other words, if you're eating, that's the door that opens. So if you're going down the track to see where you eat is one thing. The same way is that when you close that door, you can then open the other door. But you cannot open both doors at the same time, because you can't eat and breathe at the same time. And these are some of the things that are in this temple. And there's a whole lot more that we've got. But when you're looking at a people who can build on such dynamic level, you know you're dealing with a brilliant people. And you can surely understand why they don't want you to get that information today. When you're dealing with this, people say, well, why is the head pointing south? The head is pointing south because they themselves say that they forever want to face the land from whence they came, which is south of where they are. So the head faces the south, showing that they came from Nubia.
See, that's what I was saying before. This Western concept of what all that was geared to was not geared to that formula of thinking. See, they're against reality of nature, because when they look into the cosmic clock, they have a particular time that will never exist in that clock anymore. So they could not see that far ahead, because nature itself did not allow it to be part of their design. And our ancestors knew that and allowed it to be like that, so we could be improved upon.
For them to even come into existence, they had to create their own clock.
That's it. Exactly.
And take the world off the master's clock.
That's right.
And right now, we're off the master's clock. Do you know what I'm saying? Folk of lighter complexion, now I'm talking about the people caught in the pineal gland, by nature of what the world says, should never have come into existence. In order for them to come into existence, they would have had to have changed the time clock of the world.
Exactly.
Everybody follow what I'm saying so far?
No.
Okay, I'll say it again. For a people to come forward, okay, there's a clock. There was a master plan for the human people, for us to live by. In us going up into this area, we had to create a system that would be different from the original system. Okay? For that to happen, and for us to have to live in this original system, we had to have lost our way on this system. Because they had to leave this system to create a system of their own. So now it goes back to the road that we spoke about. When someone's taking you down the wrong road and you have to return back, you could do the same analogy with time. They were never meant to exist. Life was meant to be in heat. Now that they're here, they can function like any other human being. I'm not saying anything about that. But I'm saying in terms of the master plan, life comes out of heat. And cold kills. Cold kills life. And that what I'm saying is that we have to get back on to the original clock. Is it clear? Oh, okay. Okay, what's important about this lesson also is that it's a lesson on family. It is key to know this because in your lesson plan next week, you're going to get a list of all of the rulers of this time, beginning with Sennacherib and ending with Horemheb, going from 1570 to 1320. It's a family. And what I try to get our young people to see in this lesson plan is that every one of these individuals handed down a legacy to the person that would follow. Just like our ancestors, Fannie Lou Hamer, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, they have left us a legacy that we have got to hand on. We are a link in the chain. And that just like they were able to hand down their sacred legacy, we've got to do the same for our young people now. And we cannot care what other people are saying. It is too late in the day for that. We're talking about survival. And that through family, they were able to. Now, I'm not saying that it has to be a mother and a father and 2 children. It don't have anything to do with that. It could be a grandmother and a baby boy. It could be a sister and her younger brother. Whatever constitutes that family is what can make things happen. And we've got to go back to the family in order to make this understand. And there's a good way of doing it is by using this lesson plan on the 18th dynasty. Okay. The important thing to understand about the 25th dynasty is that it came about the very same way in terms of, once again, Asians gaining control. After the Ramessids and going into the other dynasties, more Asians are coming in, they're getting more control, they're becoming puppets for the Assyrians. What happens is that Kashta comes up out of Napata and moves up. And what he does is almost the same thing that Menes does. He was accepted without a fight. These Africans, when they came upon him, they said, "Brother, what took you so long?" They were waiting for an African redeemer to come forward to free them from the yoke of the Asian aggression by the puppets of Africans. It was the Africans that kept them in control, but it was the Assyrians who kept those Africans in check. It's very important to know that Tafnak, the one that he eventually went to war with, was an African person. And that they're playing the same puppet games then as they did now, but Bianchi didn't take no mess. He went up there and he literally made them take down their god. And the first thing that Bianchi did, remember it wasn't Kasha that started, it was Bianchi. The first thing that Bianchi did was to raise a temple to the spiritual order. It's the first thing he did, was raise a temple to the spiritual order that was to resurrect itself. During this 25th dynasty, pyramid building was to go on a rise, as it had not gone on a rise since the Pyramid Age. They began to build pyramids, and that is the evidence that we are going to talk about in approximately, I think, May 26th, when we start talking about why you all of a sudden start to find pyramids in ancient America. Because if you look around the world, you'll find pyramid building rising in 2 places in the world during the 25th dynasty. You will find it in this area, and you'll find it in this area, particularly in the Gulf of Mexico. So no one can say, well, why all of a sudden pyramids? Because the pyramids were being built in the 25th dynasty right here. Step pyramids. They returned to the step pyramid. They didn't build the perfect pyramid. Let me tell you something else. The pyramids of Nubia and Ethiopia are better pyramids than anything built in Egypt or Kemet. They are not as good on a magnitude, but in terms of structure and math and astronomy, they are better than the pyramids of Kemet. Can I say that again for you? The pyramids of Nubia are architecturally and technologically more advanced than the pyramids of Kemet, but they're not as massive in size. See, it's the massiveness that gets a hold of us when we look at Giza. But if you're looking for architectural and technological brilliance, it's the ones in Nubia, particularly the ones of the 25th dynasty.
I want to ask you, the pyramid and the pyramid, what they were made out of? The first pyramids were made out of the silt and whatnot.
Yes. Well, even mud and silt. Mud. Well, silt is mud when you put water to it.
Yeah, right, all right.
Okay.
But now, the grand pyramids, that's when they superimposed on the used limestone and marble and granite.
Yes, during Imhotep's time.
Yeah.
What's important to know is that at the base of every perfect pyramid is a step pyramid. No pyramid that exists is not a step pyramid. In other words, what I'm saying is that What I'm saying is that this is, if you took an x-ray of the Great Pyramid of Giza, you would see a step pyramid underneath it. After the step pyramid was built, then they began to use bigger stone. Remember we spoke about the rise and run. This is not a very good picture. And then the capstone was put on. But what they did to make the perfect pyramid is that they started to use larger blocks that began to create an incline. And the incline, believe it or not, as told to me by Mr. Grant, Earl Grant, was that it was not straight. It sloped, in fact. That it slopes inward. Architecture is brilliant. There is nothing that exists in the world today. The Japanese tried it. You heard about the Japanese going there and trying. Did such a bad job, they told them, tear it down and get out of town. They had no concept. They had no concept. It was falling apart. It was falling down. They had no concept of how they could have possibly put something. Couldn't move the blocks. The blocks started cracking on them. Didn't have a concept of how it happened. And while I'm saying that we don't need to go back and master things that we might not know, just to know this, our children have to know that they're great. Not better than someone else, but they just know that they're great and that they have the potential. This is why you keep hearing me say we have the potential to be great. Because if we were innately great because we were African, we would not be in this position. Obviously, something is lacking in us that has put us in this position. And what is lacking in us is not really a fault. In fact, it's an advantage. But it's an advantage only when you're living amongst people who have dignity and morals. If you're living amongst people without morals, it becomes a weakness. If you're living amongst people who live by honor, it's a strength. It's the very thing that builds nation, and it's the same thing that can destroy the nation. And right now, we're on the destruction side. But now we're coming around to see, you know, and Brother George is talking about that we sleep. Yes, many of us are asleep. Some of us are just waking up. I'm about at the stage where I'm just kind of rubbing my eyes. Dr. Ben is at the point where he's scratching the surface. So if all of this information is out here and we ain't even tapped into the real deal yet, imagine what our children will inherit if we at least begin the steps now. And we have got to do this with no regard to anybody else for what they feel, because please know that what is good for you is bad for them. And they will do what is necessary to make you not want to embrace it. And what we've got to do is, despite that, is not only to embrace it, but to let our children know it. Since the last time I've spoken to you, I've been with our children on a number of occasions. We've had a shooting this week.
Yeah,
that's the school where I am. We've had a lot of situations go on. But I don't mind being on tape, because what I'm going to say is true, and I've always said it. I've had experience with children, and our children are just wonderful. I'm telling you they're wonderful. It's the adults.
Yes.
Part of that shooting was the adults' fault. I'm telling you, there are things that go on that they do to our children that are just minor mentions as they're going out the hallway. They say, yeah, no wonder Kwame can't stand you. You see? Because you're already on a teacher's nerve. No wonder Kwame can't stand you. Of course, you know you're setting them up against Kwame. You see, all these sort of things happen. But in being with the children and in looking at what they're doing in the classroom, they just go like a dry sponge with this. They call me, I told you what they call me. They call me Mr. Hotep. They've changed it now. They call me Hotep Man instead of Coleman. But they are able to tap into a word and tap into a being. And the children are wonderful. I have to tell you, what I'm seeing is good stuff. And I'm at a school that is like every one of our schools. It is not an honor school. And I'm in a school where my first class is a class that is said to be troubled, and the next class that I teach immediately after them is supposed to be the honors class. The only difference between the two classes is that the class that has trouble concentrating. They can't concentrate on an item long enough to get out of it what's important. And that's because they've got all these other things going on, and I bless them. My first blessing for our children is that you came to school. Let me shake your hand on that. Just that alone I love you for. Now everything else that happens when we're indoors, we can deal with. If you've taken the initiative to come, then at least we can deal. But I watch our children constantly. And I'll tell you again, the hardest hard is the hardest hurt. The ones that give you the most trouble are the ones that have been hurt the most over over the longest period of time. They are not doing what they're doing because they're some kind of big bad characters. They are big and bad because they've been hurt so much. They want to at least give you the exterior that they're going to do you in if you mess with them. But inside, if you do, you just make them fall apart again. I'm talking about big, strapping brothers who people are afraid of. And on the inside, they have so much kindness. But they're afraid to let that out because they know that the system will take advantage of them. So they just put that shell up there. So their heart is hard. And they're not hard. In fact, they're soft. In fact, some of the softer ones are the harder ones. Are there questions? Yes, my brother.
Getting back to the Grand Lodge and Waset.
By the way, my brother, if I could just say, he calls it Waset, I call it Wa'ad. It's the same thing.
I call it Wa'ad too. That's
okay, it's the same thing. I hear Dr. Ben use the name Waset, but it's the same thing. Okay, my brother.
I need to get some more documentation as far as the outer exterior, the pictorial of that structure. Is there any books that you can directly?
Yes, there's a lot of pictorial books. When I went to Kemet in '83, Dr. Ben gave us all a book, and it had a lot of nice pictures. There are a lot of books that can give you a lot of nice pictures of the Grand Lodge. There are books that are just devoted to the Grand Lodge. In fact, that whole martial arts piece is found in the Grand Lodge, where you see the individual African doing battle with the bull and bringing the bull down. It would be hard for me to get the titles, but I can get you a couple of titles. But I'm sure that, I'm sure that if you went to an art book store, if you went to Metropolitan Museum of Art, American Museum of Natural History, if you went to their gift stores, I'm sure they would have books for you.
What martial arts?
I'm sorry?
What martial arts?
When we went to Kemet, it's somewhere, let me see, we came in here. It's somewhere on this, somewhere over here, where you have the pictographs of the martial arts, of people doing flips and blocking, and you have the wrestling with the bull. And you know in the Asian thing that in order to get your red belt, you have to do battle with the bull. That's where all that comes from. But pictures of this martial arts activity is actually carved on the wall.
But there's no book, I mean, like a book that we can buy.
Oh yes, there's a brother, there's a Muslim brother who has written a book on African martial arts. Yusef Salam, okay. Yusef Salam is written. You can get that at Mark 1. Huh? It's called. Yes, Capoeira is one. He's also written another one on African martial arts. There are two books. Capoeira is one, which is the Angolan in Brazil.
I was trying to find it, but I can't find it.
No, it's in Mark 125. Go to Amin Ra and Isis. I know it's there. It should be in misprint. And if not, she should be able to get it for you. Are there any questions? Because I'd like to break now. It's about 5:19. I'd like to break for about 5 minutes. I'd like to come back and do some questions and answers until about 5:45.
Oh, that thing with these kids is first about this one. The first one.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. We do a whole bunch of things, man. The kids love it, man. The kids love it. Kids are wonderful. It's us that are gonna get together. No, I probably wasn't there.
to leave because I have to be in New York at 89th Street about 7:15, okay? So if we can leave here a little bit by 6 o'clock.
I'm going to end at 5:45, and that would be wonderful because I'm not going to Salt City right away. I have to stop off on 125th Street. You're going to 89th Street in Manhattan?
Yeah, Madison.
Oh, if you could drop me off anywhere like on 125th Street, if you take you're going to take the Triborough, that would be wonderful. Isn't that the way the ancestors work? The one time I'm not going straight to Co-op.
Okay.
Oh, that's good, Elizabeth, but we'll meet here right after.
Okay.
Right after. Oh yeah? Oh, that's out of sight. Yeah? They should call the Caribbean Cultural Center. Where? First World? Oh, Africa?
Yes. Okay. So I do have a question. You'll be the exact
Oh, yes. I'm not used to it. I'm like,
don't cry. Yeah, right. Don't cry. Don't run. Leave me. They always do something.
purchase soil, garden. Yeah, I think we're late because some of the older folks on the block said, now you know, get an April. Give them April. Yeah, they know. They definitely know. That's when it's there's no 31st. Well, we already knew one was finished when we had it done anyway. That was the 26th. We went to the 25th. I put on my calendar the 26th, but now I know we don't go all the way to the end of June. During the week too, or just like Saturday or something?
Okay, Hotep, my brothers and sisters. We have about 15 minutes. I wanted to share some information with you.
Huh?
Last time we were together, I had and in many ways, I wish that I could give that lesson plan again. But because I can't, I'd like to update you on some new information that I've learned about black skin. It answers a lot of other questions. Few things that they talk about in this particular book. It's called Essential Notions of Black Skin.
Essential Notions
Of Black Skin. It comes from France. It's a very good book. In terms, well, it's called Essential Notions of Black Skin. And you have to order it from France. And you have to ask for the English version. And there are things that answer a lot of questions. When you take Richard King's work, Carol Barnes' work, and this book, you can put something nice together. I'm going to see if I can put it together for you so I can at least give you some additions to the melanin plan that we've had. But basically, you know, when you look at African folk and you see that African folk age much later in life, European Americans start aging about 23 years of age. Even in all of these models that you begin to see, you will see lines beginning to appear here. You will see what they call crow's feet beginning to appear here. That does not appear in many African folk until they're about 55, 60. And even when it does appear there, it is not as prominent and pronounced as it is in European Americans. Superiority, inferiority, no, we're not talking about that. I'm just going to give you the facts and you can come to the decision yourself. Basically, African skin is thicker than European skin. Much thicker. When you have a piece of cardboard paper and you have a piece of, let's say, onion skin paper, the longer that paper ages, the softer it becomes. Now you know that between cardboard and onion skin will crumble before cardboard ever even begins to. And that's basically what you're dealing with in skin. That, you know, when you go to a doctor, when you go to a doctor to get a needle, doctor has to be much more careful with you than with a European. It's very hard to penetrate black skin. And this is why many times they miss their mark on us, because it's tough to get that needle into our skin.
That's why Judge Bruce Wright, I don't know if you heard him say that years ago at one of the police conference or conventions, they changed from one caliber of gun to the other. Well, they said that the other one would not penetrate black skin, and they changed to what is the 38 that the police carry now.
Did everybody hear that?
Yeah.
Because can you say that again, please? Some people didn't hear.
I said that according to Judge Bruce Wright, several years ago at one of the police conventions conferences, they agreed to change from one caliber of gun to the other, because they said that the other caliber that they had did not penetrate black skin. And they changed, what would they carry, 38s, I think it is, that's what they have now, because the other one did not penetrate black skin.
So what is it been bouncing out?
I don't know, it was crazy.
No.
Didn't kill.
Yes.
I did a paper on this a few years ago, and it was about drug addiction, and they said that the combination of blacks in the South drinking Coca-Cola and the thickness of the skin, and that was another reason that police officers, and I believe in the state of Georgia, switched from a 38 to a 45, because the cocaine made us feel even more empowered than the thickness of our skin. That's the combination.
You know, you have what is called seediferous glands and you have sebaceous glands. Please know, I didn't know about seediferous. I had to look that up to get the phonetic pronunciation this week. This is information I did not know before, and this is why it's important to know that we're constantly building and we're constantly learning. Seediferous glands are your sweat glands. And what they're actually saying is that our pores, the way they are, since they're thick, that there is a direct line of penetration in the African skin to the energy and the power of the sun. Because we have the structured skin where and one of the things that is going to save us are our sweat glands, by the way. Because when we sweat, that creates a perspiration that also becomes like a tanning lotion. Sweat can stop the penetration of the sun. That's why you always see people that really are into getting suntans, they're always wiping their face. Because they need to get that perspiration off, because the perspiration will stop the sun from giving them a tan. When the sun hits us, our skin is thick enough to draw in. You see, remember when we say that carbon attracts and captures the sunlight. It captures it. And that's what happens in the thickness of our skin. It captures it, and everything that the sun needs to do does within the vitamin D context in this thick skin. While it is thick, it also stops the harmful rays from coming in. The sebaceous glands, which we have more sweat glands and we have more sebaceous glands. Sebaceous glands are the oil glands. I know I got a bump here one time, and it remained with me for a long time. It was a sebaceous cyst. And it was the oils that had come together and remained and become hard, and it had to be extracted. This oil in our skin is very important. But we are not an oily people. In fact, we're very dry. We are very dry as a people. We're not oily. That's what saves us. We are not oily. That's why we get chapped skin. That's why we need Vaseline, to rub it down and shine us up. Because we need to get rid of that ash. But the ash is dead skin. That's the rejuvenation of the skin, and that's why the Africans respected the snake so much. I think we've gone through this. In terms of the snake shedding its skin and renewing its life and resurrecting itself, the African looked at him and herself as the same concept. That they could shed their skin and could be born again as another physical human being. So what the book is telling us is that what the book is better than anything else, it has a lot of pictures of what skin looks like. And, it shows a melanosome in an African and a melanosome in a European. But they really do black skin, white skin. It shows what a melanosome looks like in an African and a melanosome in a European. It is obvious what the skin is about here and the importance of it. And while it is not the only place where melanin is found, it is the first entry into our system. Your organ known as skin is what determines how healthy your inside is going to be. Can you see why? Because your outside determines how much sunlight is going to be allowed to be penetrated inside in order to do its life function. So if you have a strong organ skin that does all the things it's supposed to do, then your internal organs will also be strong. But if we also go with this civilization and delve into the negative aspects of living, diet, exercise, and living style, please get your hours of sleep. You need your sleep. That's why Africans used to go with the sun. When the sun went down, it was time to regroup. When the sun came up, it was time to go out and do the work. They made sure they got their sleep. And we, in our society, are not like that. I'm sure growing up, many of us, many times, if we go back far enough amongst some of our elders, our day ended at 8, 9 o'clock. Du Bois said his secret in life to being able to manufacture and produce all that he did was that he got enough sleep. And that in sleeping, he was able to rejuvenate his system so he could do double the work the next day. If you stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning, you're going to wake up the next day, but you're going to be tired, and you'll work that whole day at half strength. Whereas, if you got your sleep, you would be able to do double the work the next day by just a matter of sleeping another 3 hours. You add on meditation, you got a whole nother system. You see, it's not how long you work, it's the amount of work you can do in a certain amount of time. And if you tap into the ancestors, you can do a great more amount of work in less time. That is why Africans never needed machines. Because the way in which they lived their life, they became machines and could do things. And it's important. And please know, your strength can multiply by meditation and by sleep. Can I say? Really? But now I have maybe about a good 10 that I can show you what melanin looks like. And all of the other things that are involved. The tyrosinase, the battery that got it going, I understood that, but this book shows me what happens when the battery is recharging itself and what happens to that free radical that they talk about. That free radical is very important. That free radical is what allows us to do those things that some people would consider to be supernatural.
How long did it take you to get this book, Francis?
Oh man, it took me about 2 months. Long before I had started this. It cost $22, but when you get the international check I think is $19. So it's 19 plus 22. But I can tell you personally, for me, it is a priceless book. For me. It's called Essential Notions in Black Skin. I'll bring the book in. I'm sorry I emptied my bag out because I had it. And I've been carrying it all week. Now, you, in terms of the ladies in the room, may like the whole book. I like the first 4 chapters. Essential. The other chapters of the book deal with how African women can take care of their skin. You know, the colors that you should put on in terms of the mascaras and the things like that. Because African folk don't put the right colors on because the cosmetics that's been created in this society are for the European woman. So that when you put makeup on, you're putting makeup on from a European context, and that does not fit the face. We need a lot of deep reds, purples. We don't need the other colors that Europeans need because their face is pale. They need any color to brighten it up. Our faces are colored. You see the whole concept, what is it called? What's the first thing that ladies put on? No, the whole foundation. There it is. Help me out. No, you don't use it because you don't need it. You don't need foundation.
Oh yeah, I heard of that.
They need foundation. You see, their skin needs foundation, first of all, because their skin is not equipped to battle the poisons, the chemicals that they're putting on their face, for one thing. That's why you have a lot of hypoallergenic things out now, because a lot of things have reacted on them very badly. So what they need is that they need to put a foundation on in order to, you know, it's like when you're painting. You just don't paint, you put primer on. Primer, excuse me, primer. Okay. You put the primer on. Yeah, correct me. Teach me. You put the primer on, then you put the other paint on, because the other paint will come off smoother with the primer on. With skin, it's the same thing. You need the foundation to put the others on. Now, my brothers and sisters, this has nothing to do with African history. But you can see the need to go into these other branches. Now, and I was told about this book from a dermatologist. If I had moved away from the concept that I can only get information about what I need from this area, then I would not be able to come to you and talk to you about this. This information is everywhere. We are a scattered world. And we have got to go into all of the disciplines to bring this information in order to make it whole. So when I get this information together and I share it with you, your lesson plan is going to have Dr. King, Dr. Barnes, and this particular book, Essential Notions, primarily. And one, Carol Barnes, is a chemist, basically approaching it from a chemical point of view, the chemical greatness. You have Richard King dealing with the biological and psychological greatness. And then you have the essential notions that deal with showing you pictures of what melanin looks like, what a melanosome looks like, and what skin looks like. I never knew that. You can see it plainly when you see the skin with the melanin in it, and you see the skin without the melanin in it. One of the first things that you're going to see is that at the end, where they cut the skin off, you see detachments of the skin. It's very weak here. And then you have the cross-section of skin. But there are pieces that are just flying out there because of the weakness of the skin itself. Amongst the African, all you see is this. Thick. And everything is in its place. And then you have these other types of like, for instance, you'll have the sweat glands and the other types of glands that literally pull the sun in and control the amount of melanin and where that melanin goes. Remember we spoke about the plant with the guard cells rich in chlorophyll, and when the sun gets enough, when the leaf gets enough sun, those guard cells will just squeeze that opening. The same is true for the African. You've got strong melanocyte cells that will let enough sun in, and then when enough sun goes in, what will happen is that those black melanin cells will close up and no more will be able to be allowed in. In European skin, you have the weakness of the skin itself, so anything can come through it. There is no control in the European skin in terms of how much melanin, and consequently you get melanosomes. Yes, I'm about to end. Yes, my brother.
You got to think about you're talking about this skin thing again. You got the thing that they talk about, the voodoo, drip, or dan, whatever it is. When they go into deep, thick trance and whatnot, they're able to lower their respiration and whatnot, and the adrenaline factor makes the skin harder. I mean, you know, come together tighter where they can walk on glass, fire, and all this and stuff like that. And anybody, when they're attacked by fear, especially black people or black mothers, their child runs in the street, is hit by the car. The front end of the car is over the child. The mother runs out and picks up the whole front of the car to pull the child out. This is all as a result of the same thing, the melanin. Because in this picture, when they said they had to update the gun from the 38 to the 45, they found out that black soldiers under the stress on the front line of war, they became like invincible, like, you know, run right. I mean, it doesn't even, you know, go into a transfixed state. You know, it's been agreed. That's why Hitler say, I'll deal with war anybody on this planet, but don't send a night fighter, because they, you know, stop nothing. This is because this high adrenaline level and this thing of the pineal gland and whatnot, you bring on this here fixed conscious meditative state that makes our skin like impervious to any type of fire, gunshot wounds, stabs, severing the limbs and whatnot. That, you know, they never understood. How can the black man keep them? That's the exemplary of our whole struggle from the time we left the first shores to now. Now, I didn't mean to say that much either.
It's okay. You know, what we have done now, I do have to say that wasn't right at the time. what we are going to do, next week we're going to talk about geography. I'd like to just outline what we've done and how we're going to end. This basically really is the end of ancient civilizations. Remember we ended ancient beginnings we ended and went into ancient civilization. This really is the end of ancient civilizations. We're about to get into ancient America, but we can't do it without looking at the 25th dynasty and what was in Africa before we come to America and see what was brought here. Prior to that, though, we need to have geography lessons so that we can get a fundamental understanding of how the Africans got here, why they would come here, where they came from, what they brought with them. So we've got to answer all the important questions which will come out in the geography lessons for next week. And we're going to take a break the following week, which is the 12th. The 19th, we have the honor of having our good brother Basiram Chawi come on the 19th to present. And then on the 26th, we're going to do Ancient America and the Olmec Civilization. And that's about where we are right now. Yes, my sister.
I just wanted to make
sure, please.
An announcement also. I will try to have those flyers ready for the 19th. Not try, but they will be for the 19th, because I really want us to push that, especially out here, so we have a good understanding. Yesterday I attended the New York Alliance of Black School Educators spring conference, and they had presented the Ujamaa Institute there. And I have to say that the brother Machawi is very, in terms of his presentation, you haven't been around the 60s movement for a while in terms of just experiencing the videotapes. You will experience it technicolor May the 19th, because he's very down to earth, and the explanations that he gives for having this institute is without question. We in this group, I don't think there's anybody in here that has a problem with that. What I'm asking you to do is to try to bring folks in that need to be converted, you know. That's what I know it's difficult now, but it was difficult to just get folks to come here, but you are the converted already. So try to bring one person, even if it's a younger person. So I'll ask you to do that. This Thursday, May the 2nd, I'm not going to lie, I'm not familiar with this man that we are bringing here to the Family Life Center, but I spoke to Brother John Branch, and he is an Omahene from Ghana, and he's going to present the topic, Christianity and Ancient African Traditional Beliefs. And since we are in this class, you know, all of the different things that we have learned from Booker T, it would be interesting to kind of compare notes and see what this brother has to say from West Africa, and for us to make a relationship. So if you can try to attend, that's this Thursday at 7:30 p.m. And I have some flyers for you to take if you want to share them. The other thing is that Hazel Rollins has been giving me some very interesting information, which kind of gives me the fuel to continue in terms of dealing with the committee in upstate. But I'd like to make this available to everybody. Is there anyone here who has access to a copying machine? Okay, if you could make copies of both of these articles.
How many did you need?
40 maybe. And yeah.
40 opposed?
Yeah, because this one's interesting. It says Yale gets big gift for Western studies. If you haven't read it, I mean, these folks are not playing in terms of bringing back Western civilization. They claim it disappeared. I don't know where it went, but they said that it disappeared off the campuses. But this brother, I'm skipping, I said brother, European from Texas, 34-year-old man who attended Yale, saw the need for Yale to develop a Western Civ course. And he's so devoted to it that he's given $20 million from his family. Now his family's very prominent, the Bass family. So the article goes on to really detail everything. So, you know, we really are at war here in terms of reclaiming who we are as a people. Not just us, but we are the major ones that are, how do you say, we are the major ones because we're the ones who always push issues to the forefront. And so if we push it to the forefront, then the Asians and the Latinos and the Native Americans will jump in on what it is we're saying. So that's why they want to make sure that they downplay us the most. That's why Afrocentric education is really being projected as a form of racism. So this right here explains everything. And we're always so scared of supporting our institutions. But $20 million just to establish one Western Civ course. All right. And this article goes on to say why there's a definite need to put Western Civ courses back, classical Western Civ courses back on the campuses throughout the United States. As I said, I don't know. When I was going to school, it was there. And from what the kids tell me, it's still there, so I don't know where it went.
And it's in the society too.
Exactly. But, you know, all of a sudden, it's being played on everyone's psyche to think that it disappeared, and we're just trying to project this multiculturalism concept. And, you know, and for those of us who are not well informed, we fall into it. And I mean, we fall into it. So, you know, I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Here. You can
But you know
have
why
that.
that's bound and fair? You know why that course is bound and fair? Because when you go back far enough, they're going to see people look like us.
Exactly. The bottom line.
You know why? Because when you go back far enough, you know, and see, this is the thing, and if we're sure of ourselves, we have no problem. Don't let nothing like this even concern you.
Yeah, but, you know, in a way, you have a point. But, in that, if you read that article, he's also talking about keeping these books alive. That, you know, this master list that they could not find one African-American author, or either African author to put on. So they will continue to study these same old European writers. Because they will not put any African writers on that list.
But you know they never stopped, and they never will.
No, but so they feel that, you know, well, you know, Central University led the fight that they were going to reduce studying some of the Western, you know, history in order to put in some of the others. So this is sort of like counteracting that.
Yes.
They think that it will become, you know, the rule, the
That's
norm on most or all the leading European universities.
Yes. And they think that putting up $20 million is going to, you know, it has a powerful message to it. Hey, if you know the truth, even the simplest of us on the street, when I say simple, I don't mean simple in the sense of that, but just the regular folk out on the street, the bus drivers, us, the teachers, everybody, we know where they're coming from. We know that they have got to offset us no matter what. This here money and all this other stuff that they're doing will not stop us. And all that will happen is that if they go deep enough into it, they're going to resurrect the Grimaldi, and they're really going to be in trouble. Because, you know, I'm looking at all the things that they're attempting to do, and what I'm attempting to really tell African folk is this, is that when we get to the point that we are so entrenched in our Africanness, this is a mere joke.
Yeah, but you're talking about those of us who are here and other groups like this. But when we leave here, and I know tomorrow morning, when I walk back into my building, I'm going to run into not white teachers. I'm going to run into other black teachers.
Yes, I know.
Who are just as foreign from what we're talking about here as I am to the moon.
Yes, I had a teacher cuss me out.
And, you know, they look at me like I have two heads. And, you know, when I start to talk about certain things, and a prejudice to be seen in my company, and run the other way because they feel that their white friends think it's you know, I'm
That's the trouble.
Yeah.
Yes. You know, I understand. I understand exactly what you're saying.
But you know something? I'm laughing as a teacher. But you know it's difficult because you may also be the one that got the blinders on.
Well, I don't have that.
You can't even bring the mate here.
I don't think
It's
so.
true. Got the blinders.
This is a wonderful time to be African.
Yeah, but the children, though, I agree with you what you said earlier. It is the children that I am able to, that is receptive to this.
Yes. And that's why we're there. That's why resurrect. You see, when we are planters, our emphasis has to be on our plants, not on the other farmers. If the other farmers want to mess up their plants, not much we can do. But as planters, our focus is the children and the community. And I assure you that this society will never be the way it was. And they can do all this that they want to, and some of us will buy into it, but those that buy into it are surely to go down with them. We are about the survival of African folk in understanding who and what they are, and that there is very little can be done to offset that at this point. I know that I feel strongly that there is no one that can stop me. I will continue to do this no matter what the cost is. And I'm sure that there are others who will do this. And I am where I am only because I stand on the shoulders of a whole bunch of folk that help me out. And others that come behind me will stand on my shoulders. But somewhere along the line, this society will fall, and we must have someone in place that can bring this back into what should be done. And our job is to be able to facilitate this amongst our young people. They will attempt to intimidate us. They will attempt to frighten us. They will attempt to do a lot of other things. But what we've got to do is stay strong and keep, like what you said, keep our focus on the children. Because our children are going to be the essences that resurrect us. And as long as I'm with them, and I can see them, and I have the kind of relationship that I have with them, and they know that I love them. They know I care. As a brother, they know. I have bigger brothers, you know, brothers that would shy away from this kind of I love you brother type thing. And they gravitate towards it. And all we got to do is do our thing. And there's no stopping us now. Everything is okay? Yes.
Quick thing. I went to a symposium at Columbia about a month ago. I was invited to go. And the symposium dealt with something about the American education, multiculturalism, and American education, and what values we should teach our children. All right? Now, on the panel was Diane Rabbit.
Wonderful. Beautiful. No, don't feel that way.
It was many churches, that are opposed to the curriculum of inclusion.
Oh, yeah.
And when I went, it was packed.
Oh, yeah.
It was packed. I mean, it reached the point there were people in the hallway, doors open, everybody was all ears. And they didn't want to let me in. But when
why not?
Because it was crowded, there was no seats.
Oh, it wouldn't have anything to do with the way you're dressed and...
So, one of the people on the panelists had invited me. So his brother happened to be there, and they were saying, well, miss, you can't come in. So he told the guy, well, she's family. I was like, oh. So when I got in, I was listening and everything. There was a brother sitting there that had locks. So we both acknowledged one another. They were talking and talking. And we were only about 5 blacks sitting in the listening boards. Everybody was white. And they kept talking about children in the public school system and how there were these gold things in their mouth. And it had reached to a point where I think someone had raised their hand and wanted to know, a white teacher instructor said that he dealt with a lot of children's parents who were on drugs. And what he wanted to know is that if the parents had any values at all, or if there was a breakdown in the value system. So I was sitting down, and one of the panelists, some European, raised their hand and said that the people in the corners had no value system. Well, boy, I was like itching, and my head was wrapped high. So I was sitting there, and I was like, I can't take this anymore. So I got up. When I went to the door, the brother was locked at the door. So I said to him, I said, I have a question to ask so bad. I said, when you raise questions in a panel like this, I don't know if they can handle it. Since it was still going and ask. So when it reached the point, I was the last one. And I looked at the flyer and I said, well, what do they mean by American education? So I went and I said to him, I'm questioning the title of your symposium. And I said, first I'll read it to you. I said, now let you ponder my first question. I said, I have a comment to make about this whole thing. So I said to him, what is American education? And he sat there. And I said, but think about it for a while. I said, but coming back to my comment, I said, everybody here is talking about children in cities. I said, none of you here have any children that go to any schools in the inner city. I said, do any one of you live in the inner city? They couldn't open their mouth. So eventually I said, and they were saying, and what values we, it said the children. It didn't say our children. It said the children. So I said, who are the children? I said, the children, as far as I'm concerned, the children that look like me. I said, so the only people that should be sitting in this listening audience talking about changing your value system is people or the parents of these children. I said, someone had the audacity to say that the people on the corners don't have a value system. I said, they have values. I said, if you critically analyze crimes that go on in the street and go on in the homes, they have a value system. I said, but the value system was broken down. And one thing led to another, and I started to tell them that they were the problem. You know, I told them that people, that teachers were the problem. And some people started to clap, they were stunned. So this one white woman jumped up and said, she's right, she's absolutely right. So one guy was saying something, and the woman said, no, she's right, because I teach in the public school system, and I've heard teachers talk about other teachers, about them being lesbians in front of other teachers, and that's very disrespectful. She said, so no, we don't practice what we preach, because that's what I had told them. So eventually, it had reached to the point that they didn't want to hear anymore. So then when they came back, I said, what about my first question? I said, what is American education? Well, it must have been about 10 people on the panel. It went from head to head to head to head, not one answer. So then one woman says, you know, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. She says, you have a symposium from 6 o'clock and it is now 8 o'clock, and you cannot answer this girl's question in terms of what American education is. She said it's ridiculous. So it reached to the point that I knew, you know, what they were doing, but I didn't know that the person that I had asked the question to was the president. Now the person that invited me was like, what is this? What is she doing? What is she saying? By the time it was time to leave and the reception, they were having a reception, I said, look, you know, you can go, you know, to the reception. Because I knew that if I walked in there with him, that he would have been in big trouble. So when it was time to leave, this man said to me, well, I must say one thing to you, young lady, you sure know how to ask questions, but I didn't know it was the president. But to tell you how they listened, I left and I went to the subway, and this man said to me, did you leave? Did you stay for the whole thing? And I was about to answer him, and I said, who are you? Did I stay for what? He said, I heard you. I left you at Columbia, and I heard what you had to say. But it was disgusting, and they was talking about something, how we've come a long way. I said, no, you haven't come a long way. I said, because you are sitting here right now, just like your ancestors did when you devised the whole slave trade. I said, because you're sitting here and talking about people that you know nothing about. I said, the people are not even here. I said, but you're planning to do certain things with these people. I said, so you haven't changed at all. But they were like, okay, that's it, boom, and the meeting was over. And you know, but you know, you reach to the point when you sit here with the information, and sometimes you know not to say anything, but it reaches to the point that boy's spirit will just prick you.
The spirit will not prick you.
I don't know how I jumped up. And
no, you don't know how. The ancestors picked you up. And said, somehow, I'm serious. Hotep.